Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Project Management Paradise podcast, your passport to project success. I'm Aaron Murphy, and today I'm joined by Dr. Randy Ross. Randy Ross is the CEO of Remarkable, and he's also the best-selling author of books such as Remarkable, Roadmap to Remarkable, Relationomics, Fireproof Happiness, and Make Life Good. Randy has collaborated with major brands such as Delta, GE Appliances, McDonald's, Panasonic, and the Intercontinental Hotel Group, to name a few. For anyone who has heard Randy speak or read any of his books, you'll know that he emphasizes the importance of enjoying one's work, fostering positive relationships within teams, and finding meaning and fulfillment in professional endeavors. Dr. Randy Ross, thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you today?
Aaron, it's my pleasure to be with you, and I'm doing wonderfully well. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Randy, to kick off the podcast, can you tell us about yourself and your background, and how did you end up becoming an expert in corporate culture and performance?
Well, you're a bit too gracious, I think, to be classified as an expert already. We'll see how that goes throughout the podcast, okay? But I appreciate that. For me, I began my work in the not-for-profit space. And had the privilege of being the executive director of some organizations that were highly impactful. It positively impacted countless people's lives, and it was an honor to lead those organizations. But Aaron, what I learned during that period of time, obviously because these were groups in the not-for-profit space, is how do you inspire people to bring their best to any endeavor? Because obviously in a nonprofit environment, people are volunteering their time. You're not paying them, you know. And so how do you tap into that discretionary effort that lies in the margins of life? Because you begin to realize that what brings people to any endeavor is not the money, obviously, because you're not paying them as volunteers. It's all a matter of whether or not that cause, that mission aligns with their purpose and their passion. Now, fast forward, I made the transition from the not for profit world over into the for profit world. And the interesting thing was, I discovered the exact same thing to be true in the for profit world. Because people, you can pay them for their hands and you can rent their heads for a season. But when it comes to their heart, that's purely voluntary. So, how do you get people to bring the best of who they are to any endeavor when we know the research tells us that as long as they're paid a fair wage, that monetary remuneration is not the number one motivating factor for most people when it comes to work. It has to do with, do the values of the organization align with my values? Do I feel like I'm part of a larger mission? And so all of those lessons I learned in the not-for-profit space about how do you engage people more holistically, I was able to carry over into the for-profit realm and help organizations understand the power of culture to tap into the greatest resource that they have, which is that discretionary effort that lies within the margins of life. So it's been a fun, interesting transition for me. And now that I've been challenging and encouraging organizations for the last 20 years to build strong cultures, you see the powerful impact of that.
That's very interesting. And it's nice that there was a crossover from the non-profit environment to the profit environment, showing that like people will always go after their purpose, their values that's true to them. And as you said, it's not about the money. It has to all align and resonate with them. So that's really interesting.
That's exactly right. Because if you want to draw the best of people out, then you have to give them a cause and a purpose that they feel good about participating in.
Absolutely. And just from my own personal reflection, I suppose the best work I would normally produce myself is usually when it's aligned with what I value. And I suppose that does apply across the board to everyone. Once you know you're feeling valued, you're going to give your best for the team and the company you're working for.
Absolutely. You've tapped into the very core of what we teach in all of our programs and helping organizations craft a culture that inspires people to bring their best to work.
Absolutely. And can you define the silent killer in organizations?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's unhappiness. Everybody wants to be happy. And happy people, we know by the research, happy people do better work. And happy people love to do good work with people that they love to do it with. And here's the challenge. Most people, we know this from the research that Gallup has done, Most people, when they get up in the morning, they're not excited to go to work. They feel like they have to go to work rather than they get to go to work. And so most people, when they roll over in the morning, they don't jump out of bed excited to go do something worthwhile. They roll over, slap the alarm clock, and wish they didn't have to go there, right? And so here's the challenge. We have to create relationally rich environments that are purpose infused in order to elevate people's happiness. Because happiness has nothing to do with extraneous circumstances. It has to do with the disposition that that individual brings to the occasion. And here's the thing, there's so much stress and uncertainty and anxiety and even depression now is at an all-time high that the engagement level among most organizations is beginning to slip. Now, Gallup has been watching this over the last 2 decades, and it's very interesting to me that in North America, the engagement numbers right now, only 32% of the American workforce is highly engaged. Now, you take that globally, and it slips even further. So you take global engagement scores from Gallup, and you realize that probably somewhere around 25% of the workers in the workforce are what we call actively engaged. In other words, they have a deep emotional attachment to the work experience. Aaron, think about that. Only 1 in 4 workers. And so, what I tell companies all the time is the greatest resource that you have as an organization is that untapped latent energy that lies within the margins of life. In other words, if you could only increase the levels of engagement in your organization by 5 or 10 or 15% more, if you got it from 25% to 40%, what difference would that make in terms of the productivity and the impact of the organization? It would be immense. And so I think that's the challenge before organizations. It's interesting, the War College, the Army War College, when coming out of World War II, and actually the Cold War, there was a phrase, an acronym that they created to describe world conditions at that time. And the acronym was VUCA. Now, some of your listeners may be familiar with VUCA because there's actually VUCA training now. And I don't know if you've run across that, but VUCA is an acronym and it stands for 4 words that described world conditions at that time coming out of the Cold War. And it was volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, VUCA. I can't think of a better description of world conditions right now than VUCA. Volatility, we see that everywhere in terms of economic, political instability, uncertainty. People are very concerned about where things are going, their future livelihood, everything from border security to economic conditions to the pressures being put on the farming communities. There's just a lot going on in the world globally right now. Uncertainty, complexity, and the world is certainly a much more complex place than it used to be. And on top of that, ambiguity. We're uncertain as to where to turn to get the right answers because finding truth in a tension saturated world, is a difficult thing for us to do. And so as leaders, we have to understand that's where our people are. So how can we provide opportunities for them to grow and excel in the midst of these conditions? And what I like to say, and as I've written in one of my books, Fireproof Happiness, our role as leaders is to turn VUCA into CAVU. And CAVU is a term that pilots use, and it means ceiling and visibility unlimited. And it means that once you rise above the dark, tumultuous clouds, once you get above the cloud banks and you look out, there's nothing but a blue sky horizon, that it's limitless opportunity, that there are no obstructions, there's no storm. You can fly forever in blue sky. And that's the thing that we have to do is change VUCA into CAVU for our people and begin to help them grow to the point that they can face and embrace challenging times.
That's very interesting. I'm going to be stealing this information for myself now off air and using this in future meetings. But it's very true. When you have so many opportunities, like there's so much room for growth. And I suppose even for those who are kind of like stressed in situations, like to see like a positive outlook will really help motivate and boost morale within their teams. Um, and in your opinion, how can you eliminate toxic elements from the workplace, such as stress?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we really can't do for people is to eliminate the stress. I think that's a misnomer. Stress is always going to be present, and stress is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you think about it, right here near Atlanta, Georgia, we have a big lake called Lake Lanier, and it feeds the Chattahoochee River, which then supplies water to communities downstream. Well, there's a huge dam on Lake Lanier that holds the water back. And that's not a problem. The dam constantly has stress on it. And that stress is fine as long as the the structural integrity of the dam is not compromised, right? But if that dam begins to leak or has fissures in it, then it becomes problematic. Stress is a part of daily life. Stress can elevate performance, but stress for the long term can have negative consequences that can be anywhere from mild daily anxiety to severe acute depression. And so I think what we have to do is we have to infuse the workforce with hope. Now, hope is one of those things that I write about because there's a distinct link between hope and happiness. And we talked about the number one thing that most people want in life is happiness. But the challenge is, how do they reach it? How do you attain happiness? That's the big challenge. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that. But as workers, I think that as leaders, we have to help our workers be able to respond by adopting an attitude and a mindset that's much more resilient. That when they do face challenging times, be that change, because I know change management is a big part of what you talk about with your listeners, how can we help them navigate those difficult, tumultuous times? And hope, to me, if you understand it and if you embrace it and you apply the principles that help people elevate their hope, it can make a significant difference in the way that they come to work. And so here's kind of an interesting turn. Um, I like to say that there are a lot of organizations that use people to grow the business, but the best organizations use the business to grow people who then in turn grow the business. And so I think the best organizations are the organizations that invest heavily in their people to help them grow, acquire the skills, the knowledge, the emotional stability that they need to face the future effectively. And by so doing, what they're doing is they're increasing their bench strength and they're actually raising up a whole workforce that then is more powerful as they move together to accomplish whatever task is before them. And so the opportunity that we have as leaders is to create that environment where people are resilient, where they're growing, and they're bringing the best of who they are to the table.
That's really, really interesting. And it's so true as well. And I really liked the what you just said there about the business investing in the right, investing in the people will bring them up. That's just it just hits that note right, if that makes sense. And I suppose like I always think of the saying, growth through discomfort. And as you were saying, stress is part of the everyday life. So knowing how to navigate it and use it as like a motivating factor can be really beneficial.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about, toxic toxic elements in the work environment, that is unfortunately much more present than we'd like to admit. We know that people don't work well in toxic environments, and so what we do as an organization is we help leaders create relationally rich environments. Now, how do you do that? Okay, there's when you're talking about toxicity, it all has to do with relationships. It's how people interact with one another. And oftentimes, what you see in corporate life is you see a lot of people self promoting, you see people self protecting, you see people fighting over credit. You see lack of collaboration. There's not a whole lot of creativity. Innovation begins to slow down. Trust is sometimes not at a healthy level. And so, what we have done is we've created a whole system uh, based upon this idea of relationomics. In other words, how do you push business forward by building healthy relationships? And there are a lot of elements, and we write extensively about this, about how do you create a healthy work environment. And there's some very practical things that organizations can do to create a more relationally rich environment where people can thrive and do their best work. And I think that means that we have to move away from a heavy-handed top-down organization to a much more collaborative environment where you have great coaching conversations that are going on, where you have open loops of continuous feedback, where organizations give individuals the kind of respect that they need and that they celebrate work well done. All of those are elements of beginning to create an environment where people feel like they want to bring their best to the table and join that with the forces of others to accomplish something significant. So it's a matter of creating a relationally rich environment.
And just to zoom in on giving the feedback, I listened to one of your talks online about how it's positive from both like the leadership and from just say the normal employee. And sometimes the leadership, they're afraid to ask for feedback or to interpret the feedback, so to speak. What would your tips be around interpreting feedback and seeing it as a positive rather than just a negative?
Well, and that's a great question because feedback is one of those things that the best organizations that we work with have been able to create these open loops of continuous feedback so that anybody at any level at any time can bring up anything to anybody else and talk about how can we improve that? What does that look like? How could we do that better? And so what we have to do is create a coaching environment where people not only are willing to offer feedback, but they're able to receive feedback. Here's the interesting thing, Aaron. The higher that people rise in organizational life, the less feedback they usually get. And so what happens is people who are leaders, they're in charge of other folks, they're managers, they're project managers. They're accustomed to giving regular feedback to those that are in their charge, but they're not always good at asking those people to give them feedback on how they're doing in terms of leadership. Now, I ask that question of executive leaders all the time, and I see the blank stares, the expressions of surprise. It's like, well, why would I ask my direct reports to give me feedback? Well, because you need it. We all need that because we all have blind spots. And we may not be operating well in our world. We may be leaving a negative impact that we're not even aware that we're leaving. But when leaders are bold enough and they do it consistently enough, and here's the key, you have to do this consistently. See, there's a tool that we use in organizational life that I'm sure all your listeners are familiar with called a 360-degree evaluation. It's where everybody in the organization gives you feedback on your performance. Well, it's a very time-consuming, costly way to do what should come naturally. We have a tendency to institutionalize those things that we're not good at doing relationally, and that's a big part of the problem. But what we should do, there's a simple question that can be asked, and if leaders will ask this of their direct reports on a regular basis, it will make an immense difference in the tone and the temperament of the organization. That's just simply to get together with your people one-on-one and ask this question: what is it like for you to be on the other side of me? In other words, how do you perceive me? What can I do to become a better leader for you? What do you need from me to excel? What resources can I provide? What barriers can I clear? What information can I give you access to that would help you do your job better? How can I improve for you? But most leaders are afraid to ask the question because they're afraid of the feedback. And if they ask the question, most people are afraid to give an honest answer because they're not sure if that leader is sincere about asking for it. And they may be concerned about the punitive measures that might come their way if they're actually honest. And so what happens is, it has to be a high trust environment that's created over time by asking that question regularly. Because the first time a leader asks the question, he may not or she may not get a response that is forthright and shares with that individual the true information that they need. But over the course of time, if we ask that question in organizational life on a regular basis, it provides a tremendous amount of feedback that will help us become better leaders, will help our teams crystallize their dynamics, that will bring more to the table, because organizations that create open loops of continuous feedback become self-coaching, and they also become self-correcting. And that's powerful. When you get to that point as an organization, you've got such a high level of trust that you can have those kinds of heart to heart, toe to toe conversations and challenge each other to grow. Because we define a remarkable culture as a place where people believe the best in one another, they want the best for one another, so therefore they expect the best from one another. And you have to have all three of those elements in place to have an effective organization.
And trust is the foundation for collaboration and to openly talk to anyone and everyone about where to go within the company. So that's amazing. That's really, really good. And we've touched on trust and the collaboration aspect and having that open loop of communication. But in your opinion, what is the most important motivating factor for people going to work?
Loving what they do. And here it lies the problem. I am a big fan of axiology. I'm a geek when it comes to philosophy, and I like to apply philosophy to everyday work environment. And so we talk and we espouse a lot about axiology. And I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with that strain of philosophy, but axiology is a strain of philosophy that talks about values, value constructs, and value creation. And when organizations learn how to apply practical aspects of axiology to everyday work life, it can make a tremendous, tremendous difference in organizational life. Because axiology at its very heart, Aaron, is about creating movements of good. Now, axiology goes all the way back to Socrates and Plato, but it's about defining and measuring good. What is good, and how do we pursue good? How do we pursue the best that we can possibly become? And that's what axiology and the principles of axiology are all about. So it's about creating a dynamic workforce where people want to do good. And when we can tap into that passion, that desire to do good, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, like in a nonprofit organization, people volunteer their time because they want to do good. They want to change the world for the better. They want to make a significant difference. And when we have that sort of a mindset and develop that attitude within organizational life, then powerful things can begin to happen. Because it's not necessarily what you do that makes a difference, but it's how you do it that makes a difference in people's lives.
That's amazing. And that was my first time coming across the term axiology. So think that was a really great explanation of it as well.
Well, and I think, and there's some principles. There's some principles too of axiology that are very impactful when it comes to organizational life, and to be able to understand and apply those. When organizations delve into that and understand it, it can be powerful.
And just to dive in on that, could you name possibly three of them that would apply to anyone in the project management space who may be listening to this podcast?
Yeah. So let's get real practical. Okay. What are some of the principles that can be applied? Well, one of the principles of axiology, the first one that we talk about, is a maximum of creativity. Now, the term maxim is just a word that means an axiom, a universal truth. We like to use the term maxim because we like to say if you apply these principles, it will maximize your effort. Okay. And so the first one is what we call the principle of creativity. And that just simply asks the question, do you create more value than you take? It's a simple question, but it's very profound in its implications. In other words, on a daily basis in your endeavors, do you create more value for others than you take away? Now, think about that in terms of a leader. Every night when a leader goes home, and lays his or her head on the pillow at night, they ought to ask the question, today, did I bring more to my workforce than I expected of them in return? Every employee, every worker ought to say, today, did I bring more to the table than I expected in return? In every relationship of life, be that with your children or your spouse or significant other or your friendships, or your colleagues, today, did I bring more to the table than I took away? Because there are two types of people in life. There are value creators and there are value extractors. And a value creator is someone who comes to the table with this idea that today I want to bring more to the table than I take away. And if everybody comes to that endeavor with that same mindset, then at the end of the day, there's a surplus on the table that then can be shared by everybody who helped create that value. It's what we call an abundance mentality, meaning that if we all bring more to the table than we take away, that it's profitable for everyone around the table. On the other hand, value extractors have a scarcity mentality, and they believe there's not enough to go around. So therefore, I have to get to the table first to get as much for myself as I can with blatant disregard for everybody else. But if everybody has an extraction mentality, then it won't be too terribly long till there's nothing left on the table. And when there's nothing left on the table, the game is over, go home. And it's interesting in organizational life, you can always quickly identify your value creators and your value extractors. And you have to be careful because the value extractors that create a toxic work environment. It's all about focus on them, what they can get, how they can drive their agenda, how they can be heard. It's all about everything is myopically centered around them. And it doesn't matter what level of organizational life, you can find value extractors everywhere. But value creators, when they all pitch in together, it becomes a very, very powerful force for good. We call that value centricity. When people's values are aligned to do good, then it creates a circuit of through which energy can flow to bring good to the world. And so, the first principle is the principle of creativity, because it says that we're all designed to create value in life. In other words, we feel good when we do good. So, how do we help people do good? How do we help them create movements of good within organizational life? And in the most powerful organizations on the planet, it's not the product that they're pushing that makes them so good. It's the impact, the positive impact that they're creating in the world that is what's so amazing to me, because people like to do good business with businesses that do good. And businesses that do good are the most influential on our planet.
That's amazing. I think that's wasn't that Google's motto as well at one point to build some good or to have a positive impact, something along those lines. I know I'm messing it up right now.
No, no, you're absolutely right. Connecting the world so that good can be done. So the question I think most organizations have to ask themselves is, where is our emphasis? Is it on making a dollar or is it on making a difference? Because here's what I can guarantee you. If an organization is focused on making a difference in the world, they will make a dollar. But if all they're focused on is making a dollar, that becomes highly problematic, because if all you're doing is chasing a dollar, then you're going to make some decisions that in the long run are not going to be best for the people of the organization. And if you make decisions that are not best for the people of the organization, it won't be too terribly long till that employee experience will be translated over into the customer experience, and it won't be what you want it to be, and it won't be sustainable. So the best organizations in the world understand that the purpose of business is to do good, to create movements of good, to improve the human condition, to solve problems, because people will gladly pay full price for those things that they deem bring true value to life. And when organizations begin to understand that, I think it changes how we approach business.
Absolutely, 100%. Delivering value will always be number one priority for those who are doing good. And I suppose the last question I have for you today is, what's the most important piece of advice you've received and how has it helped you in your career?
Hmm. Well, that's a great question. And it ties back into axiology. And I think probably the most important piece of advice that I was ever given, and it came both from mentors of mine, but it also came as a part of my study in this field of axiology. And it applies to the third principle of axiology, which says this: to effectively and consistently create value, apply your passion and your strengths to solve problems. Now, here's the interesting part. And there's a lot of talk in our world, Aaron, about pursuing your passion. A lot of people who say, do what you love to do and the money will come. Psychologically, we call that a lie. Because there are a lot of things that I love to do that nobody will play, ever pay me. I want to come over and play the golf courses in Ireland and Scotland. I love golf. I love the green grass. I love the blue sky. I love to hit the little white ball. But I love golf, but no one has ever offered to pay me to play golf. That tells you a whole lot about my golf game, right? But nobody's ever paid me. It's a passion, but that's not enough. So you have to learn to love what you do and do what you do well and pursue passion in your work. That's only a piece of it. The second piece is you have to leverage your strengths. And there's a lot of talk in the world about strengths, strengths finders, Marcus Buckingham, Gallup, all of that. And I think that there's a great emphasis on trying to lean into and leverage your strengths. But even that's not enough to get you to peak performance. Here's the key: combine your passion and your strengths. But here's the trilogy, and here's where the rubber meets the road: to solve problems. And I think that early in my career, someone challenged me and he said, Randy, most people want a problem-free existence. Most people want to remove themselves as far away from the problem as they possibly can. And so they don't take personal responsibility to solve the problem. He said, to build your career, to be effective, find the biggest problem you can possibly find and apply your strengths and your passion to solve it, because solving problems is what people will pay you to do. And the bigger the problem you find, the bigger solution you bring, the more value you create, the more value you create, the more invaluable you become. And so the best piece of advice that I ever received was charge headlong into problems, tackle problems, because when you solve problems, you create value. And that's true on every level. Me personally, as an individual contributor, my team, as we're looking to deliver value to organizations, the organization, as they're trying to find their place in the world to be productive and effective, the key is find the biggest problem you can find, something that will captivate your attention and cause you to draw from your passion to make a significant positive impact in the world. I think that's the best advice that I've ever received.
That's amazing. Just even to summarize it, I suppose it's do what you love and love what you do would be the main point I'd taken from that, along with applying your strengths to problems will always deliver value out of them. Randy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really enjoyed it. You've packed so much value into this episode, and I'm really looking forward to listening over to it again and writing down all those key nuggets of information. And if anyone would like to get in touch with you, maybe even get a copy of some of your books, where would be the best place to reach you?
Well, thanks for asking that, Aaron. All of our books are available wherever fine books are sold. You can get those online from Amazon, Books A Million. It doesn't matter, Barnes and Noble, wherever you choose to buy your books. But if you'd like to reach out and find out more about what we do specifically, you can always go to our website, which is drrandyross.com. DR, no period, just drrandyross.com. And you can reach us there through the website, and you can also discover more about the services and solutions that we offer.
That's fantastic. I'll make sure to include all that information in the show notes. And once again, Randy, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure, Aaron, anytime. And all the best to your listeners.